Hi, and welcome to my channel. I'm Pat Murray, and I'm an adjunct professor for the College of New Jersey. And today I'm going to be talking about the history of special education. As a learning consultant and child study team director, I have had a lot of experience with regard to following the law. And I want to share something with you just so that you can understand exactly how my educational career began. When I first started teaching, it was a while ago. And when I taught, I actually hadn't even finished college yet. I was given a job on emergency certification. So I learned quite a lot on that first job as a fourth grade teacher. But one of the things that I always remembered was the fact that there were no special education children, at least identified, that I was aware of. And what would happen in the classroom was we all had our own classrooms, and outside of our school building was another little building. It was, actually never went out to the building. I thought it was probably one room and a bathroom, or maybe two rooms and bathroom. And that is where the special education children, who were at that time called retarded, were being educated. The teacher, who I'm sure was a wonderful person and certified special education teacher, would stay with those children all day long. We really never saw the children. And when the special ed teacher would come into the building for lunch, I noticed right away that there was almost a segregation going on within the lunchroom. The general ed teachers had their own friendships and they would be talking about different things. And the special ed teacher kind of ate alone and by herself, which I always thought was odd. And I kind of remember thinking, isn't it strange that the general ed teachers were the ones who also were segregating the special ed teacher just as the children were being segregated? And that perception was very real. I know it was occurring, and but in hindsight, I realized that people were kind of thought she was different, just like her children. So in terms of the special education history, it really started in 1973 with the Rehabilitation Act. And that act was, it involved all children and adults from birth to whatever age to be considered for inclusion. And that inclusion would mean that they no longer could be discriminated against with even regard to getting into public buildings. That's when we began building wheelchair ramps. That's when it started to look at special education for all children, a free and appropriate education for everyone, and regardless of disabilities, regardless of handicapping conditions. Our environment was supposed to be open to all, and that included special education. So that was really a primary factor in the way education, particularly special education, came about major changes. And of course, with laws came court cases, and these court cases were decided against school districts that were discriminating or against public entities that were discriminating. It really became clearer and clearer that all public entities had to comply with anti-discriminating laws. Now, under the Rehabilitation Act of 1972 was a section called 504. And that section is the one that kind of offers the civil rights to children. And a lot of times the 504 law is what we refer to in school districts as a 504 plan, where children who might have mild disabilities but might need to have accommodations, not necessarily special education, but accommodations to get into the class or accommodations to make them have the same opportunities as other children, they would be put under what is called a 504 plan. So the 504 plan is basically civil rights, a section of the civil rights law, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Kind of got everything really started. Now, when I left in being director of special education, I can tell you the special education teachers were as immersed in the faculty room as anyone else. And our special education children were included in all programs wherever appropriate and wherever it made a lot of sense. And the reason was that special ed children got as much from their role models who knew more and had or could communicate better or for whatever reason. And the other children became more used to people with differing abilities. So it was kind of a win-win situation. But it all started in 1973. And then in 1975, we had the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That actually, it was originally called Public Law 94-142, and that's exactly what we would walk around saying. Now it is just called IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Act. And basically that requires school systems to develop individualized educational plans for children. And that's what we call IEPs. And around the world, the countries use IEPs. But what we're going to do today, since this is, even though it is a global program, we're going to concentrate on federal law and federal history toward helping children with disabilities. So in 1975, this particular law made it paramount that children with disabilities would be identified, evaluated, diagnosed, and then an appropriate plan would be developed. And within that appropriate plan was something called the least restrictive environment, and what educators, a team of educators and a team of parents, because it was a team approach when children are evaluated, those children were now given a very, very strong document to follow them and to make sure that the laws were being followed regarding not discriminating against children with special needs and allowing them the opportunities to excel in programs that included all children. Not to say that there aren't times when other programs are needed, but for the most part, this changed the way we looked at segregating and including children. Now, the IDEA also mandated that not only did children have to be identified, not only did children have to have a plan written for them or program for them, they had to have related services. Related services means like physical, occupational therapy, physical therapy, other speech and language therapies. Those are called related services, busing, related services, things that help them succeed in the class environment. That was all in IEPs, but you had a diagnosis, and then you had a plan, and programs had to be developed, and children therefore were becoming more integrated because teachers were made to follow the plan. And I hate to use the word made, but the bottom line is there's two trains of thought. A lot of teachers were saying their primary responsibility was not to the special education children, it was to what they called their children. And this is where a really huge number of court cases came up, and eventually it became clearer and clearer that the law was going to protect children and make sure that both special ed and teachers and general ed teachers would work collaboratively and collectively to benefit the child who was being identified. And that plan, it had actually put down, it required that the child's teacher, the one that was identifying the problems, or the child's teacher who had the child in general education, as well as the child's teacher who had the responsibility of educating the child with and following the IEP and giving the child with special needs special strategies. And the parents became a huge part of this team. So since 1975, we've really had a lot of court cases. And again, the court cases drive the responsibility of the districts, but it also drives the compliance. And if school districts were not compliant with the IDEA, the Individualized Educational Act, Individual with Disabilities Education Act, the districts would have their federal funding withheld. So it really had clout. It provided a huge push for all school districts to expand their choices for special needs children. And depending upon their diagnosis and then depending upon the research, as the years progressed, more and more court cases would help children with special needs become more integrated into the general education program. I remember too, years ago, there was a court case in a neighboring district, and that also made history because the parents of a Downs child wanted him educated in the regular first grade, and the district thought he should be in a segregated program, and it went through an appeal process, and it actually the parents did win, and it was again a landmark push to make sure all children were getting a free and appropriate education. FAPE, that's called FAPE, a free and appropriate education, and that districts looked at how do we make our programs, what resources shall we put into that IEP, that individualized program, what resources shall we put in there to make that child successful in the least restrictive environment. Now, I want to speak just a little bit about that terminology, LRE, the least restrictive environment. As part of every IEP, there has to be consideration for what will be the least restrictive environment that we can put a child with special needs in. So after a child is evaluated and diagnosed, and that also comes with another process, but after they are evaluated by a team of people who are educated in disabilities, and they are found to be eligible for special education, and then a plan is developed by the team of parents and general ed teacher and special ed teachers. The child also, as part of that decision making, had to be looked at in terms of the least restrictive environment. And the least restrictive environment is the general educational program. So we always start by saying, okay, here is the best program for all children, which would be the general education. And then what can we do to make it really good for those special needs children to be able to be successful? How do we level out the playing field? How do we give them the special help that they need so that they can be an integral part of the general education program? And that piece of legislation with the LRE, the least restrictive environment, continues to be a very touchy subject in many ways. That's probably one of the largest numbers of court cases have probably come about because parents want their children either in a lesser restricted environment, or sometimes the opposite is also true. But we always have to look and start with what's the least restrictive environment and what kinds of accommodations can we put in and what kinds of modifications can we put in to that IEP. So the individualized educational program, the IEP, that is developed by the team including general education teacher, special education teacher, and the parents, that IEP becomes the cornerstone of what happens to that child. And it has to be reviewed constantly, at least at a minimum of every year. And you have to take a look at what works and what doesn't work. And so it's work in progress. It always is work in progress. So the reason why I want to bring that up is because IEPs do differ in terms of their format to some extent, because the federal law is what drives it. The federal law has very strict rules about what needs to be in an IEP, but the state can actually go further. Federal law, of course, will supersede state law, but nonetheless, the states can actually put more and more suggestions, laws into place, state laws into place, that will allow the children to have even more resources. And I am proud to say that New Jersey is one of the most, I believe, integrated states and one of the most progressive states with regard to special education. Now, sorry, I have a dog. DJ, I cannot do this. You're barking. Oh, DJ. All right, go ahead. All right. You know what? Just stay up there. Just stay up there. They will come up when you're ready. DJ, enough. Enough. Seriously, enough. You know what it is? Yeah, I know you know. What? Yeah. Now, how am I going to edit this? DJ, stop. 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 Well, I am right in the middle of a YouTube channel stream that I am taking for my students, and of course, the dog is barking. I'm like, oh, come on, DJ. Oh, get down, DJ. Down. Down. Leave Uncle Jim alone. No. No.
The other dogs on me that were at
You want to go in your kennel? You don't jump up. Okay. No jumping. No, I'm not sure how to do this. I'm going to end the stream. How do I beat?
Yeah, I see you there. You little pain in the neck, you.
Okay, don't say anything for 1 second, okay? So what we're going to do at this point is take a stop, break point, and then we will continue with our next session. Thank you for subscribing and enjoying this particular part of a history to special education law. Okay. And